I didn't find out where I stood in my family from a letter or a fight or even a conversation meant for me. I found out at Thanksgiving, seated at the same table I'd been sitting at since I was 6 years old, between the same people who raised me, while my mother carved the turkey and explained to my aunt why my brother's new house needed a bigger down payment. "We're helping him out," she said, casual, the way you'd mentioned picking up milk on the way home. "He's got the kids, the mortgage, all of it. You know how it is." My aunt nodded. My dad refilled his glass. My brother's wife smiled like she'd just been handed a gift she'd been expecting. Then my aunt turned to me. "And what about you, Jess? Are your folks helping you out too?" The table went quiet. Not dramatic quiet, just that half-second pause where everyone recalculates what to say. My mom set down the carving knife, wiped her hands on the towel and said, "Oh, Jess is fine. She's always been the independent one. She doesn't need us the same way." She said it warmly, proudly even, like it was a compliment, like calling me unnecessary was the highest form of praise. I looked at my dad. He gave me that familiar nod, the one that meant the conversation was over before it started. My brother didn't look up from his plate. His wife reached for the cranberry sauce. I smiled. "Good to know," I said. No one reacted. No one caught what those 3 words actually meant. They went back to eating, talking, laughing, and I sat there, chewing my food slowly, realizing that the ranking I always suspected had just been announced publicly, and no one in my family even noticed they'd done it. Before I get into what happened next, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe if this feels familiar, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been the strong one in your family, the one everyone assumed didn't need anything? My name is Jess, and I grew up in a 3-bedroom house in Charlotte, North Carolina, with parents who loved both their children, just not in the same amounts. My brother Kyle was 3 years older than me, firstborn, first everything, first to walk, first to talk, first to get his name engraved on the family Bible our grandmother kept on the mantle. My parents named him after our grandfather, a man they spoke about like a saint. I was named Jessica because my mom heard it on a TV show the week before I was born. She told me that story once, laughing, like it was charming instead of careless. Kyle wasn't a bad kid. That's what made it harder. He wasn't cruel or reckless or disrespectful. He was just there first, and somehow that meant everything that came after him, including me, operated on what was left. Leftover attention. Leftover money. Leftover enthusiasm. I learned this language early, not in words but in patterns. Kyle's soccer games had both parents on the bleachers. My dance recitals had one, sometimes none, depending on Kyle's schedule. When he got into college, my parents threw a barbecue. When I got a full academic scholarship to a state school 2 years later, my mom said, "That's great, honey. Can you pass me the remote?" I didn't complain. That's the part people don't understand. I didn't throw fits. I didn't rebel. I absorbed it. Every small slight, every redirected conversation, every moment I was talked over at the dinner table. I filed them away, not out of bitterness, but because I thought if I were good enough, patient enough, useful enough, the math would eventually change. It didn't. After college, I moved to Atlanta for a marketing job. Good salary, good apartment, good life that I built brick by brick without asking anyone for help. Not because I was too proud, but because I'd learned long ago that asking meant waiting, and waiting meant being disappointed. Kyle, meanwhile, stayed close to Charlotte. He married his college girlfriend, had 2 kids, and opened a landscaping business that my parents funded, not a loan, a gift. $40,000 pulled from savings that I didn't know existed until my mom mentioned it casually during a phone call about something else entirely. "Your dad and I dipped into the retirement fund a bit for Kyle's startup," she said, "but don't worry, it'll pay off." I paused. "You had $40,000 in savings?" "Well, it was earmarked for emergencies." "And Kyle's business is an emergency?" She laughed. "Oh, Jess, it's not the same. He has a family." I almost said, "So do I. I'm your family too." But I didn't, because in that house, in that logic, family meant Kyle. I was just the reliable one hovering in the background, making sure nothing fell apart. Over the years, my role became more defined. Not officially, never officially, but functionally. I was the one who remembered birthdays. I was the one who called every Sunday. I was the one who flew home when Dad had his knee surgery and sat in the hospital for 9 hours while Kyle couldn't get away from work. I was the one who paid for Mom's new glasses when insurance didn't cover them because Kyle was tight that month. Every time I told myself it was fine. Every time I told myself this was just what responsible people did. And every time, the unspoken agreement grew louder. Jess will handle it. Jess doesn't mind. Jess is strong. Then Thanksgiving happened. And those 3 words, good to know, became the line between who I was and who I was about to become. Nothing changed after that dinner. That was the part that shook me more than the words themselves. I flew back to Atlanta and waited for something. A call, maybe. A text saying, "Hey, I hope that didn't come out wrong." Anything that suggested someone had noticed the shift that happened inside me. My phone stayed quiet for 5 days. Then my mom texted a photo of Kyle's daughter in a princess costume. Isn't she adorable? No context, no check-in. Just a reminder that the spotlight had a fixed position, and I wasn't under it. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I did something I'd never done before. I didn't respond. The silence felt strange at first, like holding my breath underwater, uncomfortable but clarifying. I kept my phone face down on my desk at work. I stopped checking for messages during lunch. I let hours pass without offering help, reassurance, or emotional labor to anyone who shared my last name. And nothing broke. The world didn't collapse, Kyle's kids didn't starve, my mother's feelings didn't shatter. Life kept going, just without me quietly funding and supporting it from 300 miles away. That scared me more than anything, because it meant I had been optional all along, not in the way a family member should be optional, but in the way a convenience is. A vending machine people walk past until they need something. I started pulling back slowly, not with announcements or ultimatums, just practically. I canceled the recurring transfer I'd been sending my parents for household extras, $80 a month they never acknowledged. I stopped covering Kyle's phone bill, which I'd been paying for a year and a half because he said he'd get to it. I removed my credit card from the family Amazon account that somehow always had charges I didn't recognize. Each small disconnection felt like pulling a thread. I kept expecting the fabric to unravel, for someone to notice. But weeks passed, then a month, and the only message I got was from Kyle asking if I'd changed my Amazon password because his wife couldn't order diapers. I told him yes, I'd cleaned up some of my accounts. He sent back a thumbs-up emoji and didn't mention it again. My therapist asked me how I felt. I told her the truth. I felt like a ghost discovering she'd been haunting a house where no one remembered she lived. 5 months later, the phone call came. I was at work halfway through a client presentation when I saw my mother's name flash on my screen 3 times in a row. I stepped out into the hallway and called her back. She answered before the first ring finished. "Jess, we need to talk." Her voice had that tight quality I hadn't heard since Dad's surgery. Controlled panic, like a person trying to whisper during a fire. "What happened?" "It's complicated." She paused. "Can you come home this weekend?" I leaned against the wall. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a work thing. Can you just tell me?" Another pause. Longer this time. Kyle's business is in trouble. Real trouble. And there's some other things. Your dad and I, we made some decisions that didn't pan out. We just need the family together. The family. As if I'd ever been fully included in that word. I told her I'd think about it. She said, "Please, Jess," in a voice I almost didn't recognize. Thin. Fragile. Afraid. I drove to Charlotte that Saturday. 6 hours on I-85 with nothing but my thoughts and a podcast I turned off after 20 minutes because I couldn't concentrate. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly. My jaw ached from clenching. I knew what was coming. Not the details, but the shape of it. The same shape every crisis in my family had ever taken. Something goes wrong, someone needs money, everyone looks at Jess. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. Paint, peeling near the gutters. The lawn uneven. Kyle's truck was already there, parked at an angle like he'd arrived in a hurry. Inside, the living room had been transformed into a war room. Papers covered the dining table, envelopes stacked in messy piles, a laptop open to what looked like a bank statement. My dad sat in his recliner, not reclined. My mom stood near the kitchen doorway, arms wrapped around herself. Kyle sat on the couch with his wife, both of them looking at the floor. Nobody greeted me. Not really. My mom gave me a quick hug that felt more like a reflex than warmth. My dad nodded. Kyle glanced up and then back down, as if making eye contact might start a conversation he wasn't ready for. I sat down in the only empty chair and waited. My dad started talking, slowly at first, then faster, the way people do when they've been rehearsing bad news. Kyle's landscaping business had been losing money for over a year. He'd taken out a second loan using the house, my parents' house, as collateral. The loan payments had fallen behind, way behind. On top of that, my parents had co-signed a line of credit for Kyle's equipment purchases, and when the business couldn't cover the payments, the debt had rolled onto them. "How much?" I asked. My dad cleared his throat. "Combined, about $92,000. The number landed like a stone in still water. I watched it ripple across every face in the room. Kyle's wife started crying quietly. Kyle stared at a spot on the carpet. My mom's hands trembled against her crossed arms. My dad looked at me with an expression I had seen 100 times before, the one that said, "You're the capable one. Fix this." "And what's the plan?" I asked. My brother looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what are you doing about it? What steps have you taken?" Silence. My mom shifted her weight. My dad opened his mouth, then closed it. Kyle spoke first. "We were hoping you could help bridge the gap, just until things stabilize. You're in a better position than any of us right now. No kids, no mortgage, no help from anyone," I finished for him. "That's why I'm in a better position." The room got very still. My mom stepped forward. "Jess, this isn't the time to what?" I asked calmly. "To point out that I'm in a good position because nobody ever invested in me? You gave Kyle $40,000 to start his business. You co-signed his loans. You paid for his wedding. When I graduated with honors, you told me to pass the remote." "That's not fair," Kyle said, his voice rising. "None of this is fair," I said. "That's the point." My dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Jess, we can go back and forth about the past, or we can deal with what's in front of us. We're about to lose this house. Do you understand that?" I understood. I understood better than any of them. Because I was the one who had spent her entire life understanding things quietly and alone. "I need a week," I said. Relief washed across my mother's face. Kyle's wife exhaled. My brother nodded quickly, the way people do when they think yes is coming. But I wasn't calculating how much to give. I was deciding whether to give at all. I drove back to Atlanta that night instead of staying over. I needed my own space, my own walls, my own silence. The next morning I called my financial advisor. Then I called a lawyer. Then I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down everything I needed to think through before I made a decision that could change my life. The following Saturday, I drove back to Charlotte. This time, I carried a folder. The house smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. The table had been cleared except for one neat stack of documents, as if someone had tried to make desperation look organized. Everyone was already seated when I walked in. Same positions as the week before, like a stage play returning for its second act. "Thank you for coming back," my mom said. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She'd been crying, probably more than once that week. I sat down and placed the folder on the table. Everyone stared at it. "I've thought about this carefully," I said, "and I'm willing to help, but not the way you're expecting." My dad reached for the folder. I let him open it. His eyes moved across the first page, then the second. He looked up at me, confused. My mother leaned over to read, and I watched her expression shift from hope to something harder. My brother craned his neck from across the table, and his wife whispered, "What does it say?" "It's a loan agreement," I said, "with conditions." Kyle shook his head slowly. "A loan? Jess, we're family." "Yes," I said, "and this is how I'm choosing to help my family. With structure, with accountability, with a plan." The conditions were straightforward. Before any money moved, Kyle had to close the business and find stable employment. My parents had to list the equipment Kyle had purchased on credit and sell what they could to offset part of the debt. All household finances had to be documented monthly, open to review, and the entire family had to commit to 6 months of family counseling, not as a suggestion but as a requirement for the agreement to hold. There was also one final condition: a written acknowledgement that no future financial request would be made of me without a formal discussion. No assumptions. No casual texts. No, you're the strong one logic used to justify putting the weight on my shoulders. My dad pushed the folder across the table. This is cold, he said. You're treating us like strangers. No, I said evenly. Strangers don't get offered help. I'm treating you like people who need to change a pattern. My brother stood up. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Finally get to be the one in charge. I looked at him steadily. Kyle, you got $40,000 to chase a dream. You got your loans co-signed. You got your phone bill paid. You got the barbecue and the Bible and the better room and the bigger plate at every meal. I got told I was fine. I got told I didn't need help. I got told at Thanksgiving dinner in front of the whole family that I would always come second to you. So no, I'm not enjoying this, but I'm done pretending the math was ever equal. He sat back down. His wife put her hand on his arm. He didn't shake it off, but he didn't lean into it either. My mom reached across the table toward me. We never meant to hurt you, Jess. I know, I said, but you did, and you never noticed. That's the part that matters. She pulled her hand back, pressing it against her mouth, holding in a sound I'd never heard her make. My dad stared at the paperwork for a long time. Then he said, "And if we say no?" "Then you say no," I replied. "And I go back to Atlanta. And you figure this out the way I've figured out everything in my life. Alone." The room was silent. Not the awkward silence of a dinner gone wrong, a heavier silence. The kind that fills a space when people are finally hearing something that was always being said. I stood up. "I'll come back tomorrow morning. You can decide tonight." As I reached the door, my brother called my name. I turned. He wasn't angry anymore. He looked tired, confused. Maybe, for the first time, a little ashamed. "Do you really think this is going to fix anything?" he asked. "No," I said, "but it might stop what's been breaking." I spent that night in a hotel off the highway. I ordered room service, took a long shower, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I didn't cry. Not because I was holding back, but because something in me had already moved past the part that needed to cry. I felt clear. Not happy, not vindicated, just clear. Like I'd finally cleaned a window I'd been looking through my whole life without realizing it was dirty. The next morning, I drove back to the house. My mom opened the door before I knocked. Her face was pale but composed. She stepped aside without a word. Everyone was at the table again. The folder sat in the center, open to the last page. My dad had already signed. My mom's signature was next to his. Kyle's was at the bottom, slightly shaky, but there. His wife had signed as a witness. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then my dad cleared his throat and said, "We agree." I nodded. "Then we start." The weeks that followed were uncomfortable for everyone, including me. Kyle closed the business and took a job managing the grounds at a country club outside Charlotte. It was a pay cut from what he used to make, but it was steady, honest, and didn't require anyone else's money to keep running. My parents began selling off equipment, a trailer, a mower that cost more than my first car, tools that had been gathering dust in a rented storage unit. Each sale chipped away at the total. Family counseling started 3 weeks after the agreement was signed. The first session was brutal. My mom cried through the whole hour. My dad sat stiff as a board, arms crossed, answering the therapist's questions with one-word responses. Kyle alternated between defensive and deflective, and more than once tried to redirect the conversation to my attitude at the meeting where I presented the folder. But the therapist was good. She didn't let anyone hide. She asked my parents when they first noticed a difference in how they treated their 2 children. My mom said she didn't know what she meant. The therapist rephrased. "When did you start seeing Jess as someone who didn't need your support?" My mom stared at her hands for a long time and said, "I don't know, maybe always." That word, always, sat in the room like a stone. I didn't say much during those sessions. Not out of coldness, but because I'd already said what I needed to say. The folder had spoken for me. The conditions had spoken for me. For the first time, my family had to sit with the consequences of a pattern they'd been running for decades, and I didn't have to be the one managing their emotions while they did it. Slowly, things shifted. Not in a movie way, not with tearful apologies and group hugs, but in real ways. Kyle started calling me on Sundays, not to ask for things, but to talk, awkwardly at first, like he was learning a language he should have known since childhood. My mom started asking about my job, my apartment, my friends, with genuine curiosity instead of the polite 5 seconds before she pivoted to Kyle's kids. My dad, who never talked about feelings, left me a voicemail one night that said, "I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you. Should have said it more." I played that voicemail 11 times. Back in Atlanta, my life felt different. Not because anything external had changed, but because something internal had finally been set down. I slept better. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I made plans on weekends without keeping a backup window open in case someone needed me. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since college, because for the first time in years, my evenings belonged to me. The debt took 14 months to resolve. Kyle made every payment on time. My parents sold the equipment and downsized their cable package and their lifestyle. The process wasn't graceful. There were setbacks, tough months, a period where Kyle almost relapsed into asking me to float him just this once. I said no. He figured it out. And the next month, he called to tell me he'd gotten a raise. On the last day of the repayment schedule, my mom called. Not to celebrate, not to thank me. She said something I didn't expect. "I've been thinking about what you said at that table, about the remote control, about passing it to you on your graduation day." I held my breath. "I didn't remember that moment," she said quietly. "But I believe you, and I'm sorry it took losing a house to make me listen." I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I said, "I'm glad you're listening now." And I meant it. People ask me sometimes if I regret how I handled it, if I wish I'd been softer, warmer, more forgiving from the beginning. I don't, because softness is what kept me invisible for 29 years. Softness is what trained my family to see my strength as a resource and my silence as permission. Softness is what allowed an entire Thanksgiving table to hear my mother rank her children out loud and not a single person, including me, said a word. What I did wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was the first honest conversation my family ever had, and it came in the form of a folder with terms and conditions. Because sometimes love doesn't look like sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like a boundary drawn so clearly that no one can pretend it isn't there. If you're listening to this, and you're the one your family calls strong, the one who never asks for anything, the one everyone leans on but nobody holds up, I want you to hear this clearly. Being strong is not the same as being seen, and you deserve to be both. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if stories like this make you feel a little less alone, subscribe to Pearl Revenge so you don't miss what's coming next.